Welcome to the Blockbusters and Birdwalks podcast. I am the curator, Garrett Chaffin-Quiray. As written about and taught in the United States, the history of post-World War II movies often follows this pattern: Italian neorealism and responses to neorealism, the impact of TV, Hollywood spectacle, the French New Wave and responses to the New Wave, Cold War movies, social realism, movies from Sweden, Japan, and China, Hollywood's second golden age, New German cinema, Third World cinema, Hong Kong, Bollywood, Australia, and New Zealand, the rise of the blockbuster, the impact of home video, corporate synergy versus independent production, CGI, international co-production, the impact of the internet, and streaming. We might add to this movie-centric list other sociocultural experiences, including civil rights agitation, anti-colonial independence movements, gender and sexuality-based advocacy, various wars, several epidemics, and more than a handful of economic crises. Then, we might sprinkle in some famous and influential people, both inside and outside the arts, like Kennedy, Gandhi, Kubrick, Warhol, Lucas, Thatcher, Reagan, Beyoncé. Finally, we drill into specific movie titles and themes we're interested in exploring. In this idiosyncratic history of post-World War II movies, we continue with A Nightmare on Elm Street and Exploitation. The history of movies can be defined by realizing there are appetites a potential audience has that can be sated by the activities of filmmakers. One can call this exploitation because it exploits the appetites of people ready to see and hear adventure stories and characters that they may not be able to enjoy in their private lives, but still have an appetite to enjoy on a screen. So, exploitation, as an element of story design, narrative, set design, and character development, is baked into the movie-going experience. When we pull back a notch, though, and consider exploitation more generally, we're often talking about established filmmakers determining a ready-made audience for material that doesn't need to be made with the same loving care, attention, or budget that is often lavished on more polished entertainment. Therefore, a particular audience is targeted with subpar material on purpose because that audience will accept the subpar material either because they don't know any better or because there aren't alternative ways for them to become entertained and they wish to be entertained by whatever comes their way. Let's return to the post-World War II moment and recognize that Hollywood studios were in open collapse through a variety of factors in the 1940s and onwards. Perhaps chief among these various factors is the growing and expanding generation gap defined by the baby boom generation from 1946 to 1962. There were many kids, then as now, who believed in the traditions they were raised to enjoy and celebrate. But there was a notable number of young people coming up in the 1960s who wanted a different form for America. This changed spectator base and adjustment in what Hollywood was doing opened up a fracture. This fracture, on one side, depended upon old-style entertainments. Here, think of a Ben-Hur, the Academy Award-winning movie from 1959, which certainly appealed to lots of people. But then think about something like Easy Rider in 1969, also a huge success on a much smaller budget, but definitely targeted at an entirely different segment of the American audience, indeed of the world audience. A concept drives right through the middle of this chasm, and that is the image desert. By the time we reach the 1970s, we become very aware that there are certain kinds of story worlds which rarely, if ever, find their way onto a big screen. I call this the image desert. And harvesting the image desert becomes one of the ways exploitation movie makers define what's possible by focusing their attention on stories, places, and characters that were heretofore never seen on screen. What do I mean more specifically? Well, most movies made through the 1970s tended to be about men doing men's things with women as window dressing. And these men tended to be able-bodied, blue-eyed, light-skinned white dudes who were youthful. As we shift forward in time into the later 20th century, closer to our present, we start to realize that our culture has many different people who aren't defined by the general strategy I just spoke aloud. Consequently, by the 70s, we begin to see movies that are targeted specifically at women, at African Americans, at Hispanic Americans, at Chinese Americans, etc. But a lot of that work is being made on low budgets to exploit the lowest common denominator with no sense whatsoever that this material has a long shelf life and will be watched again after initial release. Many of these different kinds of image desert exploitation movies were done in mimicry of mainstream hits. We see this pattern crop up over and over and over again, and significantly, this exploitation pattern of making things tended to privilege profanity because that upset people. It tended to privilege sexuality and nudity because that upset people, and violence, graphic and otherwise, which, you guessed it, upset people. You combine these elements, and that makes exploitation movies run aground against the newly established censorship regime of the Motion Picture Association of America. In fact, many exploitation movies bypass the traditional distribution and exhibition pattern to avoid the rating system in total because that becomes part of their calling card. These movies are so gnarly, so twisted, so violent, sexy, and profane, they couldn't be released into conventional theaters, so for you lucky few with the courage to come watch, you're getting something special. Pointedly, exploitation movies, whether they're about and targeting queer folks in queer backdrops, black folks in black backdrops, etc., they're usually relying on core stereotypes that the mainstream audience of moviegoer believes to be true about whatever exploited group is being explored in the present adventure. The thing about exploitation movies is that they overlap with another category of consideration we often rope off as a cult movie. A cult movie is a movie made under an unusual production circumstance that is irregular, for an unusual viewing circumstance that is irregular, with content that is irregular, and in a context of viewers and fans, you guessed it, that are also irregular. You roll this together, and the cult categories of production, content, reception, and context overlap with exploitation to such a degree that we recognize exploitation movies really aren't being made for people who are seeking the rewards of an Academy Award. They are being made under ridiculous circumstances, often with almost no budget whatsoever, for a very small sliver of the overall public who are nonetheless entirely devoted, super fans. Now, we roll forward through the late 1970s into the early 1980s. What we come up against is a peculiar form of horror movie called the slasher film. And while there are antecedents of the slasher movie dating back to at least something like Psycho and Peeping Tom, the whole movement gets some real energy in the 70s with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and then the text, Halloween in 1978, which spawned a whole series of copycat movies. The basic exploitation formula of these slasher movies is a group of young people are hemmed in by a circumstance where they're trapped for a certain period of time. It can be an overnight celebration at a slumber party, it can be a prom, and they are being assailed by some supervillain that seems almost unkillable. Typically in the slasher movie, the young people who die first are the ones who are sexually active and demonstrate their sexuality to get the audience excited, but also to set off our killer, who then murders people wholesale until typically there is a final person, often a naive virginal girl, the so-called final girl, defined by such philosophers of movie studies as Carol Glover.
Morality sucks.
We then move into the 1980s, and there is another significant thing to consider, and that is the home video revolution. Before the 1980s, if a person wanted to see a movie, they would go to the theater. Sometimes some movies would show on video sell-through to television, but you couldn't depend on that, nor could you plan on it. It was always catch as catch can, depending on what the major networks would show, a movie of the week on a Friday, a Saturday, or a Sunday night. By the time we reached the 1980s, though, We realized that distributors, with a backlog of titles dating back decades, could find a new audience by releasing videotapes to home viewers who would take these videotapes home and watch them on their VCRs as they saw fit and when they saw fit, pausing when they wished to go to the restroom or get a snack, pausing when they wished to sleep overnight, and returning these movies on their own schedule for a small fee than was true of buying a ticket to go to the show at a first-run or second-run theater. You roll this together, and by the time we reach 1984, the slasher movie idea has been firmly planted in the American popular culture, and we have an upstart filmmaker called Wes Craven, somebody whose earlier works, like The Last House on the Left, help codify some of the terms of the slasher movie from the 1970s onward. He re-enters the game with A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984, which takes the slasher idea but raises it a notch. The premise of A Nightmare on Elm Street is that we're in suburban America, among a bunch of upper-middle-class white kids going to high school. We center on a young woman named Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp. She's dating a young man named Glenn Lance, played by Johnny Depp in his feature film debut. The Thompson clan, Nancy's parents, are now divorced, and she lives with her mother Marge, played by Ronnie Blackley.
You want to know who Fred Krueger was? He was a filthy child murderer who killed at least 20 kids in the neighborhood. Kids we all knew.
Oh, Mom.
It drove us crazy when we didn't know who it was. But it was even worse after they caught him.
They put him away?
Oh, the lawyers got fat and the judge got famous, but somebody forgot to sign the search warrant in the right place, and Krueger was free just like that.
What did you do, Mother?
A bunch of us parents tracked him down after they let him out. We found him in an old abandoned boiler room where he used to take his kids.
Go on.
Took gasoline. Poured it all around the place and made a trail of it out the door. Then lit the whole thing up and watched it burn. But he can't get you now. He's dead, honey, because Mommy killed him.
We know that Freddy Krueger, played in the movie by Robert Englund, is a ghost who haunts the dreams of young people. Importantly, Nancy has a best friend, Tina Gray, played by Amanda Wyss, and Tina has a boyfriend named Rod Lane, played by Nick Corey. Rod is out of high school. Tina and Glenn and Nancy are all in high school. Tina and Rod are horny, and they have the sex. And Tina is haunted in her nightmare by Freddy, who begins attacking her. We cut out to watch Rod wake up from his sleep. But she's being assailed, split open, and bleeding everywhere by Freddy Krueger, who is unseen. Thereupon, Rod is accused of having murdered his girlfriend, and it all rolls up as Nancy begins to realize something is afoot, because she is haunted by Freddy in her dreams as well. The balance of the movie, then, is Nancy trying to figure out a way to fight back against Freddy Krueger so he won't murder her, because she knows Freddy is the root of this whole thing. In the end, it seems that Nancy is able to defeat Freddy.
You're nothing. You're shit.
But the conclusion of the movie suggests no, in fact, that's not true at all. Freddy is actually overcoming all of these characters, and Freddy will win. Jump forward. A Nightmare on Elm Street was very successful on its scale. The budget figure that I could determine suggested it was made for just over $1 million, and domestically it earned over $25 million in gross ticket sales. That's a really good rate of return, which means there's likely to be a sequel. in the case of this franchise, the Elm Street franchise, there have been many sequels, and the whole of the franchise was rebooted a number of years ago for a fresh new glimpse with a brand new star at its center playing Freddy Krueger. Also, the Elm Street series has overlapped with some of the other slasher movies which were made famous from the 70s onwards, like the Friday the 13th series. Spin it all together, and this is a movie that makes a star of a then little-known actor named Robert Englund, who had at one point tried out for some of the roles in the George Lucas movie Star Wars. As we watch this movie, though, we see the formula of the slasher movie updated for a new twist, and the twist, of course, is that dreams and nightmares can haunt the physical reality of awaking people. That's a kind of a gnarly concept, and it allows the way that they do production design and costume design elements in this movie to be creatively distinct from many of the other movies that were cycling through the grind houses and exploitation houses of the middle 1980s. My point, A Nightmare on Elm Street is a movie that tries to focus on prurient interests. It lets us look at young people having sex. It lets us listen to young people using coarse language. It lets us watch these young people be assailed violently. And importantly, the main characters that we're watching are teenagers. Tina is murdered, and she is described on screen by a newscaster as being a 15-year-old person. She's further defined in the movie as being a sexually active 15-year-old, which means that Nancy, who's beginning to have those feelings for and about her boyfriend, played by Johnny Depp, is a 15-year-old beginning to feel all of that energy. And Freddy is right there to pounce and drive through her libidinous desire. What do I mean? There's a really pivotal scene where Nancy is beginning to figure out ways to keep herself awake. She drinks a lot of coffee. Nonetheless, her body begins to break down across a number of days of being serially awake. She falls asleep nude in a bubble bath with her legs splayed. We see a shot from the end of the bathtub looking towards her face, where she's carefully submerged so we don't see those parts of her nude body. But Freddy's clawed hand reaches up from the water. Know that Freddy Krueger's hand wears a glove with specially devised razor blades across his fingertips so he can slash and cut his victims. That is, a phallic hand emerges from between her legs where her sexual organs are to attack her. Her sleep is interrupted by her mother banging on the bathroom door, whereupon Freddy drags her down into the water. These are moments that expose a funny world at the very heart of modern horror movies, at least in the sort of lower-budgeted exploitation cycle of slasher movies, where sexual desire among young people blooming into their adulthood is always a danger zone of possible conflict and harm, because that sense of adult maturity is here being policed by a monster. I have an aunt who was a combat nurse during the Vietnam era, and their family was looser about AV material that the kids were allowed to watch, which meant, in one getaway with my cousins, we went quietly into a den, closed the door behind us, hooked up the family VCR, and had a tape of A Nightmare Before Elm Street, which we plunged into the VCR looking for excitable material. And at a very pivotal moment, my aunt opened the door and looked in to see what we were doing. On screen, what we're watching is Nancy falling asleep in her high school. In the dream she's having, she observes her newly murdered friend Tina, who is in a body bag, leaving a slick trail of her blood. She's being pulled by an invisible Freddy Krueger. My aunt sees this and pauses to say, "There's not enough blood in the human body to leave that kind of a trail." Mic drop. Thank you for listening to the Blockbusters and Birdwalks podcast. My name is Garrett Chaffin-Quiray. Boop boopity doo.